welcome to today's webinar, Mayors Leading in Poverty Reduction from Edmonton to Hamilton. As I mentioned, my name is Liz Weaver. I'm the Vice President of the Tamarack Institute, and I'm thrilled to be here today with our guest speakers, Mayor Eisenberger and Mayor Iveson, as well as our guest interviewer, Mr. Brock Carlton from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I'm going to introduce Mr. Carlton and then turn it over to him. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that Mr. Carlton helped us moderate the 2016 Cities Reducing Poverty Summit last April, when vibrant communities brought together mayors and city councillors from across the country to focus on poverty in Canada and the leadership role that municipalities have in facilitating sustained positive change. We're thrilled, Brock, that you're able to join us again and moderate this year in Hamilton for the third annual summit, Cities Reducing Poverty When Business is Engaged, and that you're here today with us to highlight this important conversation and to help us review and forge ahead on the commitments that we made almost a year ago now. Before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like to make brief introductions with the audience. And so I want to read your bio, just a brief section of your bio, Brock, which is not unsubstantial. Brock Carlton is the CEO of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and he leads a strong team of FCM staff and a united membership in advancing municipal issues or municipal interests by influencing both federal government decisions and national debates on issues critical to communities. He has built partnerships with private sector interests, professional associations, not-for-profit organizations, and the academic community in order to speak as one united voice about the priorities of municipal governments. Under Mr. Carlton's tenure, the municipal sector in Canada has seen dramatic increase in federal investments, as well as recognition for the vital role it plays in national interest. FCM is now recognized as one of the most influential organizations in Canada, while Mr. Carlton has been named as one of Canada's top lobbyists. Mr. Carlton is a dynamic and passionate speaker on municipal issues, federal-municipal relations. He believes that strong nations engage their municipal governments as true partners in nation building, and that they invest in their cities and communities as a means of solving local and national challenges. Prior to joining FCM, he lived and worked in Kenya, China, and Namibia, and has a master's degree in international affairs from the Norman Paterson School at Carleton University in Ottawa. Mr. Carlton and his wife Susan have 3 adult children. Welcome to the webinar, Brock, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Liz. I really appreciate it. I think it's a really important issue that we're discussing at the conference and today and every day as we work to reduce poverty in this country. I would just like to take a couple minutes to introduce the 2 mayors, and then we can move on to questions. I should, just before introducing them, I should say it's a really great pleasure for me that I know both of them well, and we work together on many issues around the table of the big city mayors and around the FCM agenda. So first I'll introduce Mayor Fred Eisenberger. Fred is Mayor of Hamilton. He's come back as Mayor in October 2014. And like all mayors, Fred has a real passion for his city, and he's really pushing to place Hamilton as one of the 10 largest and most important cities in the country. Fred's driving a really strong local economic development agenda, particularly diversifying the economy, placing Hamilton as a center for innovation. He's put Hamilton on the international map through hosting the Pan Am Games in 2015. And Mayor Eisenberger has been a really strong proponent of the poverty reduction agenda. He participated in the 2016 conference in Edmonton, Cities Reducing Poverty, and as a result of that, he came back to Hamilton and with his council colleagues committed $50 million over the next 10 years to poverty reduction work in Hamilton. So welcome, Fred. It's great that you're joining us today.
Thank you, Brock. Always a pleasure to be with you. Look forward to
I'll just say a few words about Mayor Iveson, and then we'll get to the questions. So Mayor Iveson became mayor of Edmonton in 2013, and he's really driving an agenda that focuses on 4 priorities: building a more uplifting and inclusive city, building a more resilient and green city, building a more prosperous and competitive region, and leading an effective and open local government. Mayor Iveson, as you would suggest, hosted the city's Leading Against Poverty conference in 2016, so he's quite an advocate for poverty reduction work at the city level. He's also a leader in thinking about and acting on the questions of reconciliation with First Nations communities. He chairs FCM's Big City Mayors Caucus, which is the caucus of the 22 biggest cities in Canada. And last November, he was on the Canadian delegation to the conference on climate change in Marrakesh, where he spoke on behalf of Canadian municipalities and municipalities generally in the fight against climate change. So it's a great, as I said, a great pleasure to have these 2 mayors with us. Before we just get to the questions, just to frame the issue a little bit. So there are 5 million Canadians who are living in poverty, and they're living in cities and towns. So how cities and towns manage and deliver services really matters in the poverty agenda. How cities and towns plan and set priorities really matters in the poverty agenda. The cities are on the front line of the poverty reduction challenges, and strong local leadership is needed to reduce the effects of poverty and to in fact reduce the numbers of those who are suffering from poverty. As I mentioned earlier, in Edmonton last year, Vibrant Communities held the Cities Reducing Poverty Summit. At that meeting, 332 Canadians, mayors, councillors, municipal staff, and others met to learn, share, and inspire each other in the belief that all of that leads to stronger local leadership, which is what is needed if we are going to find sustained change and real impact on this poverty question in our cities and towns across the country. So I'm going to go now to questions, and we'll start with Mayor Eisenberger, and as soon as Mayor Iveson's on the line, we'll pick him up in the question as well. So Mayor Eisenberger, can you speak a bit about what you learned as a participant in last year's summit and what motivated you and your team to bring the summit to Hamilton this year in 2017?
Thanks, Brock. You know, we always look for opportunities to highlight some of the challenges we have in our own communities, and to go to Edmonton last year and witness you know, the work that's being done not only in Edmonton but in other communities across the country is affirming in many respects of the work that we're doing locally here to try and tackle the issue of poverty and poverty reduction. So for me, it was an opportunity for us to not only learn there but take that message back to Hamilton, and then you know, apply that to you know, encouraging the conference to happen in Hamilton so that we can broaden our message here in the city of Hamilton in this region. You know, one of the challenges for poverty and how to reduce poverty has a lot to do with public perception and community support, and you can get that by continuing to highlight the issue in a very public way, and bringing a level of understanding in the broader community that this is an issue that needs to be tackled aggressively, and we can make headway in those challenges if we actually have a level of commitment that we're currently making in the city of Hamilton. So we've had a poverty reduction strategy for many years. Many great people, of Liz Weaver being one of them, that has put their shoulder to the wheel to set up the strategy and to actually put it into effect. And yet we find that we haven't had the kind of traction that it requires. So my view has been that we need a stronger financial commitment from all levels of government and all agencies and all partners in our communities to actually tackle this issue head on. And that's kind of the approach that we're taking. And that message, hopefully, we can deliver when the conference happens here in April.
Yeah, I have to say, you know, I was, as Liz said, I was moderating the discussion in Edmonton, and your presence and your presentation was quite inspiring and brought a lot of hope to people that there's some real energy coming out of Hamilton. I also was thinking that, you know, I grew up in Dundas, so I cycled through Hamilton to work in the factories for years, and I never understood as a young adult the degree to which people along those routes and those parts of Hamilton were struggling with such challenges related to the poverty in parts of the city. So the work that is going on is really inspiring. You know, it's been a short time since Edmonton, really about 8 months, but just wondering if if you've seen any change, you've seen any progress in your community, or in the conversation you're having with other mayors as a result of what was discussed in Edmonton just those few 8 months ago.
Yeah, very, very much. I mean, I think, again, getting back to the awareness issue, I think this is a topic now that people are much more willing to talk about and get out in the open and really start talking about some collective strategies. And it certainly led me, I mean, I already had it in my mind in terms of how can we find more resources. And when I got back from the conference, I was committed to finding those additional resources so that we could actually enhance our strategy and be ready for what I expect will be a more comprehensive national and provincial strategy on poverty. And that certainly has taken place on the provincial side in Ontario, and we hope and anticipate that the federal government will step up in a bigger way, either on the housing fronts or on the whole range of issues that they could be of assistance on in terms of their infrastructure commitments that they're coming forward on. So in Hamilton, we were fortunate that we had some resources that we could realign towards poverty directly. That we would never have been able to do that if we hadn't had, either many years, and I think the Edmonton conference, I think, added value to that, really motivated a lot of people to think that, we can do this. It's not on the tax base. It is a lot of money, but if you break it down, $5 million a year over 10 years, it's just the beginning. So people are, we're getting to the point now where people are prepared to put in more significant resources as a result of the conversations that are being had in Edmonton, in Hamilton, and across the country.
Yeah, those comments about awareness are so important and leverage so much energy and potential resources. Mayor Iveson, are you on the line now?
I heard all of it. We couldn't reply, but now we can. So I found my voice.
Okay. So maybe before we move too far away from the Edmonton Conference 2016, I could ask you if you could just talk a bit about why you chose to work with Tamarack and Vibrant Communities in bringing that conference to Edmonton in 2016.
Well, Vibrant Communities has been doing excellent work in Edmonton with the support of Tamarack and many foundations for several years now, and was a critical part of the sort of backdrop to the End Poverty Edmonton work. And so when we were invited to speak at the Tamarack conference in Ottawa in 2015, it was really clear that there was a groundswell of support among particularly municipal leaders at that time. And so the opportunity to work together last year on an event that was really focused on how municipal leaders could add their voice to a growing consensus and add some political heft, as well as do some convening in each one of our communities. And this is, Hamilton has always been, I think, for a long time, the example of where this happened first. And so we sought to emulate Hamilton in our work. But, Calgary, Toronto, London, other cities have undertaken rich municipally led poverty reduction or poverty elimination efforts that have led to tangible policy change in the municipalities on everything from transit to housing to living wage policies, for example. And really it seemed like the time to bring that conversation to the mayors and to the cities. And so it was great to have a strong turnout last year and to be able to connect with folks through the Tamarack network who have a lot of policy knowledge and who are connected to a lot of the allied networks that are necessary to put the pressure that Mayor Eisenberger was talking about on provincial and federal governments at a particularly critical time where certainly the federal government is developing both a national housing strategy, which is a pillar of this work, and a national poverty strategy, which is really the whole ballgame. And so it seemed like opportune timing in the spring of last year, and I'm grateful that Hamilton is hosting, in conjunction with Tamarack, a continuation of the dialogue, because I think municipal leadership, given the strong consensus among so many of the big city mayors on this file, and communities mid-sized, small, and rural as well, there really is a moment to influence the national agenda.
So Just looking back from now looking back to 8 months ago, do you notice any significant changes in your community that are attributed to the conference or a result of just the momentum over the last few months and awareness and energy around the question?
The momentum's clearly been building. There was huge value in having the Tamarack event in Edmonton in terms of galvanizing continued support from our base of allies and supporters here, and also situating our efforts in Edmonton in that broader national context. And that was very helpful as our 5-year community roadmap came through council with the goal of lifting 10,000 people out of poverty in 5 years. And then we funded a number of initiatives focused on city action in our most recent budget. So a number of programs through our FCSS, which is our social service prevention grant programs, about $2 million a year was realigned there, an additional $1.5 million this year, and an additional $1 million the year after for implementation of specific initiatives around reconciliation and tackling racism. Low-income bus pass is moving into implementation this fall, and the Community Development Corporation with an injection of $10 million worth of land. So much like Fred, we rolled up our sleeves and said, okay, we've got good plans, let's move into implementation. We were able to do that with unanimous support from Edmonton City Council, as well as continued support from UNDP, the Edmonton Community Foundation, and other NGOs and foundation partners in the city, as well as secure support from provincial and federal governments to sit on the End Poverty Edmonton Stewardship Group.
I wonder if there's a bit more to dive into around this question of momentum and the change in the conversation, particularly with federal and provincial governments. You know, I'm thinking when I started my term as CEO at FCM good 9-10 years ago, there's a real, almost a fear in the municipal sector about the question of poverty reduction, and the fear that embracing that agenda would lead to downloading unsupported by resources and just more and more piled on to the municipal agenda. So I'm wondering now where the municipal leaders like both of you are embracing this agenda and really driving it, I'm just wondering, again, that question of momentum in the federal and provincial conversations. Mayor Eisenberg, you want to take a crack at that first?
Yeah, you know what, so what we found as in the course of our work, which has been going on for 10 to 15 years, and, you know, many of the supports that we put in, is that there's been a collective realization that it's not any one municipal agency or government, level of government, that is going to be responsible for this. So we've had the ability to actually pull in our healthcare system and our Board of Education and some of our major, you know, universities and colleges, and they are all taking a part in coming up with strategies in terms of the poverty issue, and so and including business, and that's really the next step, I think, is to have a greater sense of responsibility on the business side. You know, just a few years back, we had the newspaper do a Code Red series in Hamilton, which, you know, many are probably familiar with. And it was a really stark realization of the real extreme impact of poverty in our community and what that meant in terms of life expectancy. And that got a lot of people's attention right across the board. And from that, we've been able to not only create an anchor institution group, which is basically all the major institutions in our community coming together on all of our collective big, hairy issues in our city, as well as bringing in our provincial partners to really kind of follow through on some of the ideas that are coming out of that organization. And then we've been able to also leverage our neighborhood action development strategy that comes out of that. And you know, the decision was clearly made that even though we can get together as institutions and come up with ideas and strategies, that most of the beneficial work that needs to happen in neighborhoods and needs to be led by neighbors in communities that take ownership of their own particular environment in their community. And that strategy has worked amazingly well. And the ability for us then to follow through on that with additional resources means that it is a total team effort. And I think this issue needs that kind of complete total team effort, or else it's doomed to fail. And we, like I say, we've had our poverty strategy in place for the better part of 15 years. And now we're really starting to see, by our collective effort, some real movement on some of the very key issues that we need to deal with to have an impact. And I think that is a testament to the kind of the team approach and bringing all the institutions into play.
Great, that's very interesting. Mayor Iveson, anything to add?
Yeah, I think inaction was leading to downloading anyway, is how I would see it, in the form of homelessness, social disorder, lost economic opportunity. And when we see it through the lens of unmet potential for human beings who are economically marginalized in our communities, then without taking full responsibility for all of the solutions, we certainly have the opportunity to become advocates and also to consider those things that are directly within our purview. So, for example, low-income transit access, low-income recreation center access, elimination of fees that may be barriers to libraries usage, for example. So there are plenty of things that are within our purview that in and of themselves won't wholesale solve poverty, but will improve mobility, access to services, reduce stigma. And so there are things that are very much within the municipal bailiwick. And I think partly because of mayors calling attention to the need for action, we create conditions whereby policymakers at senior orders of government who do have those responsibility are moving to take action. And so we've already seen that in Alberta with some changes and investments around housing. We've seen that both provincially and federally with changes around income support for families with children to help address child poverty. And so we're starting to see some of those actions that are very much in the hands of senior orders of government. But to Fred's point, at the end of the day, a lot of the change needs to happen in neighborhoods, in community, where people will be most empowered and supported, and also help create solutions that are relevant to them. And that's where our Community Development Corporation is very much a bottom-up approach to neighborhood job creation, neighborhood real estate development, provision of housing and commercial space that supports families whose needs aren't being met in the market. And certainly we'd appreciate support from senior orders of government, but in that case what we needed was land, which was within the purview of the city of Edmonton.
I'm just sitting here listening to both of you and thinking, wow, you guys are so passionate and so articulate and thoughtful about this issue. It should make anybody listening feel like our cities are in pretty good hands. I'm just going to shift the questions a bit from the poverty agenda generally and the event of Edmonton 2016 and look forward to the event coming up in Hamilton. So April's Cities Reducing Poverty Summit, run by Vibrant Communities, hosted by Hamilton, is going to look at the role of the private sector plays in poverty reduction. There are many instances through positive employment practices and income security, such as paying livable wages, through food security programs, helping develop affordable housing, etc. So Vibrant Communities is inviting communities to join at the conference and increase the understanding of how we can engage business in this work. So the question to both of you, and maybe I'll start with Mayor Eisenberger, is what do you feel is the business case for engaging the private sector in poverty reduction?
Well, I think we just touched on the very good work that municipalities and all of its kind of anchor institutions are doing. And I think one of the issues that business worries about is, are you working from a plan? And do you have kind of the ability to measure outcomes from that plan? And I think based on what Don's saying and what we're doing, what they're doing in Edmonton and other municipalities, and certainly in Hamilton, we have pretty defined and pretty clear plans that the business community can fit into. And we're seeing that there is some uptake in terms of those issues that the business community wants to participate in. So, for instance, in Hamilton, we've had community gardens that were basically civically sponsored for quite a long time. There are obviously opportunities for residents, local residents, to tap into growing their own food and in particular areas. But that then get morphed into an even bigger urban farm in the city of Hamilton, in a particularly challenged neighborhood that not only provided an opportunity for local neighbors to provide food for themselves, but also employment. And that was significantly sponsored by the private sector, the local industry. And so they're stepping up in very defined programs that can provide benefit in local communities, and seeing strategies in place that the municipality has adopted that will actually make a difference rather than throwing money at the issue collectively. They're seeing actually on-the-ground strategies owned by local residents, supported by municipalities, that they can then piggyback on and know that their investment is going to make some success. I'd also say there is a changing impression of corporate responsibility. And, you know, there was a time, and, you know, back in the day when we were first starting our employment, potentially, Brock, is when, you know, you started off with an employer that might back then have looked after you for the entirety of your life. And we all know that that's long gone, and all the supports that came with it are gone too. And so I think there is a growing, renewed sense that there needs to be a higher level of corporate responsibility for corporations. And I think shareholders and investors today are also looking for corporations that have a stronger social responsibility and that are more interested in participating in looking after their employees for good or for ill, and not just when things are going great. So I would say there's a changing mood out there, but it all comes through, I think, very, very precise and very defined plans that are happening on the ground that the business community feels that they can step into and meet some success in.
That's great, thanks. Mayor Iveson?
Well, we know that ending poverty makes good business sense, and a study was done a couple of years ago in Alberta looking at the costs of poverty to the economy here. And $7 billion is the cost that was estimated in terms of lost productivity, costs to the health and justice system, and it was a robust study, and it was written by Joe Ceci, who is now the Minister of Finance for the Government of Alberta, and so it's a credible source and one that government understands well. But we were also able to share that information with the business community, and on our task force that we put together for End Poverty Edmonton, we included business leaders from a number of different industries and sectors, including folks involved with the Alberta Chamber of Commerce, with our hospitality industry, with our utility industry, and energy industry, and they were persuaded and became very strong allies for us as well. And so including people in the formulation of these policies and the review of the data is very, very important, and then enabling them to be champions and continue to be involved in the stewardship and implementation work from a governance point of view is also helpful. So we've made sure to mobilize knowledgeable advocates to make the case within the business community, and that continued engagement will be required.
That's really, really interesting. Just before we go to the more open question and answer period, just one last question, if you have a couple of comments each. One, really, what are the next steps for you in the municipality in your poverty reduction work? Mayor Eisenberger, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, we're as you know, we kind of led off the beginning of just after the conference last year to put together a $50 million 10-year plan for the municipality, which is the first time it's ever happened in any significant way, over and above what we're already doing. So we have many support programs out there. There's many millions of dollars already spent in terms of transit, affordability transit passes, a whole range of things that are in place. But there's a realization that housing it becomes the kind of fundamental issue that provides stability for people, and so the housing support that we do have, we're going to continue on with, but we think that an affordable housing envelope, which probably most of the $50 million will align itself to, is properly aligned not only for our community, but aligned with where the federal and provincial governments are going, so giving us the ability to not only refresh the existing affordable housing stock, but build new. And that's one of the challenges that are happening right across the country. And we spoke about that at the BCMC caucus meeting the other day about imploring the federal government to give us good dollars to do affordable housing work with, and not make it a 50-50 requirement, but reducing the requirement on municipalities because there isn't exactly a return on revenue. So we believe that the $50 million identified for us is kind of the next step, the next big step that we can take that aligns well with where the federal and provincial governments are going, and that will afford us the opportunity to provide some real significant housing opportunity changes that can stabilize people's lives. And I think that I think housing fundamentally is something that that everyone would want to have to be able to stabilize their environment. And as Don pointed out a minute ago, I think the realization that if we don't invest these kinds of dollars, we're going to invest them much more significantly in the healthcare system, in our criminal justice system, and elsewhere. And those reports have been done, and all that evidence is there. So people are now coming to realize that upfront investments can save us money going down the road. And I'm happy to see that we're able to do that here in Hamilton, and hopefully we'll get it all sorted out by the time the conference happens.
Great. Mayor Iveson, what's next for you guys?
Well, data has always been key to this. I mean, we want to be able to understand our baseline condition. We want to be able to make evidence-based interventions. And then, of course, we want to track our progress. And so working closely with the University of Alberta, where some of the measurement and analysis has occurred, and also with the Edmonton Social Planning Council, we're going to be updating our Edmonton poverty profile early next month so that we understand what our baseline situation is, what's changing, and track our progress towards our goals that we've outlined in the overall End Poverty Edmonton work. We're also launching an online toolkit for faith community that Bishop Jane Alexander, who's our Anglican bishop, worked with funding from the Anglican Foundation of Canada. She was also co-chair of the Mayor's Task Force that led to this work, and is co-chair of the End Poverty Edmonton implementation work as well. And so she has been a phenomenal link to faith communities who continue to be strong advocates, and we're going to empower through this toolkit specific opportunities for tangible action that faith communities can take in everything from working with Indigenous cultures to advocacy. And so it's another implementation that's happening right away. And then you know, we're working in the medium term towards developing a concept around an Indigenous culture and wellness center. We're working towards a living wage policy for the City of Edmonton and our staff and procurement. We're working with partner organizations on destigmatization of youth and vulnerable citizens, and have worked in partnership with some groups to work with at-risk youth to help folks like, for example, our transit peace officers change their attitude and change their approach, and bring a different lens of compassion and understanding to their interactions with vulnerable youth using our transit system. And that's led to even something as simple but really uplifting as a basketball game between some of these youth and the transit peace officers. And so building bridges in communities that might have been at odds previously. And finally, developing a poverty lens to inform overall city policy making. So some policy work that's underway. And then I agree with everything that Mayor Eisenberger has said about the criticality of housing to this work, and we continue to push for those big investments, particularly from the federal government, to recommit to the existing social housing stock, grow the inventory, and support more families who need housing as that foundational element to being lifted out of poverty.
That's really interesting. Both of you have mentioned the critical nature, the critical piece that housing plays in this. There's a question from one of the listeners who's asking really about the most effective incentives for building affordable housing. So what do you see as the most important incentives for stimulating affordable housing construction in your communities? Don, you got anything?
Sure. I mean, I think this is one of those questions of role clarity. First of all, municipalities outside of Ontario anyway aren't typically burdened with funding and maintaining the social housing inventory. And so from my perspective, maintaining jurisdictional clarity there and not letting the senior orders of government off the hook is critical, lest we wind up in a situation like Ontario's and in Toronto in particular, with the results of downloading without funding to accompany. But where we do certainly have an opportunity to really enable some innovation is around leveraging public lands, and those could be city lands, but also, the federal government has committed to inventory surplus federal lands, which exist in smaller and large part in communities across the country, and those are opportunities to do significant, not project development that's sort of uniform in terms of economic outcomes, but mixed income communities, mixed use developments that add vibrancy to the entire neighborhood. And Regents Park is an example of that model of kind of redevelopment, and may not be on the same scale in all other Canadian cities, but municipal lands, provincial and federal surplus lands are a great opportunity to unleash some innovation from private housing developers on the basis of inclusion of affordable housing and social housing on a more sustainable and potentially internally cross-subsidized basis, leveraging the efficiency of building as part of a larger project as well. So I think municipalities are best suited to help broker some of those arrangements between not-for-profit providers, private industry, and public lands. And so I think we can be catalysts for some of that kind of innovation. And if favorable financing through either the Infrastructure Bank or the CMHC or another agency is unleashed by the federal government to accelerate efforts like that, then we can accomplish even more.
Fred, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so to follow on the first thought that Don came up with is the provision of land is something that we're talking to the federal and provincial governments about, and I think that's a very positive step. We're doing that in the city of Hamilton in terms of downtown parking lots. We're making them available for developers to do a mixed income type of mixed use type of development. If they were able to do that and include inclusionary zoning in that, then we're prepared to offer up some land for them to actually build some affordable housing for us. And that's, I think, a very positive step. And we, in Hamilton, although we're growing quickly now, I think there's an upsurge in terms of development here in Hamilton at the moment. We do have, city-owned properties that we can make available. And if you add to that what the federal government has, which came up at our big city caucus as well, and the province of Ontario, if they're to make available some of the surplus lands that they may have, that certainly is a boost to the development community in terms of taking on these challenges and being able to do it without having to pay full market value for land. We're also looking at the waiver of development charges, and of course in Ontario we have the province of Ontario has recently passed an inclusionary zoning requirement or an ability for municipalities to tap into that, which I think gives us the tools to require new developments to have a component of affordable housing built into them. And we've also had the density bonusing that we're employing in certain circumstances that will allow for community good to be developed into a development that is affordable housing or mixed income housing. And so So we have a range of issues that we're doing, and all of them is a kind of a suite of opportunities that we can put into the mix that allows for either private sector or for not-for-profits to actually step in and do a much better job of providing affordable housing. Having said all of that, I mean, the downloading that's occurred in Ontario as a result of that started some 20 years ago has left us in quite a significant deficit. And as you recall, we got the inventory, but we didn't get the resources to actually maintain the inventory, and we've been struggling ever since. So I think there's still a need for the federal and provincial governments to step to the plate with assistance for us.
Okay. I realized we slipped into the question and answer without me signaling to the audience that we've got about 10 minutes left. If you do have questions, please submit them through the question box. We try to get to the questions that are being asked, and we'll just keep going for the next 10 minutes or so. I noticed there is a question that just came in a couple of minutes ago, and it is, do you have any recommendations for other community groups who are trying to engage their municipality in endorsing and including a poverty reduction strategy in their budgets and in their priorities as a municipality? So, what do you advise to community groups who are working with their local governments on these issues?
I would say that it is not just the local council that needs to be engaged in that. I think it's really a kind of multi-agency effort, and if you can get some of your major institutions to stand behind that, it then makes it much more possible and much more easily supportable for local councils to actually put positive measures in place that will make a difference. So having in Hamilton, McMaster and Mohawk and the healthcare community, and some of the major employers like IBM and ArcelorMittal Dofasco be part of some of our poverty initiatives, and part of the working of the developing the strategy is critically important. The Chamber of Commerce, all of them kind of partnering up makes it much more difficult for councillors to say no. And so I think that's really, at the end of the day, for councils to adopt a strategy, they need to know that it has certainly some significant support out in the broader community. And if you have that, it just makes it much more smoother to get through the process.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Iveson, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I would simply add that I think it's possible now to assert that it is best practice for local government at least to be involved, not to lead it unilaterally, but to be a key member at least of the coalition that in a lot of cases in many communities has been working for years on this. And as that coalition grows to the kind of robustness that Mayor Eisenberger was talking about, I think it becomes unavoidable. But then secondarily, to make the case that though there might be investments required, there's also the opportunity to realign existing investment because of integration with a larger strategy. So for example, that $2 million worth of FCSS realignment that I mentioned earlier, that's value added. So the effectiveness of where those dollars, those prevention-based social service dollars are going, has been increased because it's now part of a larger and more coherent strategy that's also leveraging partner dollars from the United Way, partner dollars from the Community Foundation. And so if it's narrowly through the perspective of, well, the city's going to have to put a whole bunch more money in, then you have to articulate that there are partners, that there's leverage opportunities, and that there's a value for money in terms of stronger outcomes for the dollars that are going in, and then that's a favorable climate for potentially making additional investments. And then if that still doesn't get through, then you can dump a whole bunch of poverty strategies from major Canadian cities on the table and say, well, we wouldn't want to fall behind City X, which happens to be your CFL or NHL rival.
Yeah.
Calgary was ahead of us. So.
Sort of consistent with the question of community groups and community engagement, there's a question here about public perception. And the question is really, the public perception is a huge issue for progress, especially in conservative communities. In your experience, have you been able to educate the public? Have you seen the public education as an important part of the work that you've been doing on the poverty reduction strategies? Mayor Eisenberger?
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. I mean, were it not for the Poverty Roundtable and the 15 years of lead-up work here, we would never have been able to convince council to part with $50 million of either dividend money or future fund money here in Hamilton. That is so important, and the community was just ready for that. And I think the level of support that we've heard in the broader community has been outstanding, and I think people, today understand why it's important, because they understand the business case. As Don pointed out earlier, it is an investment in the future of our kids and the future of our community, but it pays back in dividends and actually reduces our costs, not increases our costs over time. And people are now accepting that because we've been able to provide the evidence. And the evidence doesn't lie on this. I think the data that Don talked about, the measurables that we've been able to put into our programs, has now provided the kind of evidence that allows us to go and take these programs to the next steps. Were it not for that level of understanding, working with our local newspaper and our local media to get the messages out there, then it would be very difficult to get this across the line with 16 councillors that, in many respects, are listening and have their ear to the ground in their own local communities. And so we had unanimous support for this. And I think that would never have happened had we not been able to get out in the broader community and get that level of understanding and engagement.
Great. Mayor Iveson?
There's no doubt that the value of broadcasting from the mayor's podium and from City Hall and City Council has raised the level of discourse and awareness in the city. But in this case, I really have to credit the partners who are at the table in a lot of cases since before us, and in particular the United Way, which made solving poverty their goal for their campaign 3 or 4 years ago now. And so the reach of that campaign in the community, in workplaces, in partner organizations, and in the agencies who they were already working to realign funding around that goal in particular, that had a huge impact. So it had already softened up the ground considerably. And so as these movements build, I think having those civil society engagements precedent, in our case, made it a lot easier for me to talk about it in the mayoral campaign and seek a general mandate to convene and develop some recommendations and take some action on this. So I really credit civil society and the NGO space, and then the researchers for providing evidence along the way, and then just community support, particularly from faith communities who reminded us, our bishop reminded me at one point, you know, her community's been working on this for a couple thousand years. So local government is new to the game, but that ground softening is critically important.
So along those lines, are there any institutions or sectors that have surprised you with their desire to get involved in the poverty reduction work?
Not for me. Not for me, Brock. I mean, I think, you know, as Don pointed out, I mean, a lot of this groundwork has been done by kind of a whole collection of agencies that came together. The Community Foundation, our local United Way, City of Hamilton, and McMaster University, Mohawk College, all of our kind of major institutions, public health. I mean, it's been a collective, ongoing effort. But to your point, I would say that the missing piece going forward now is actually the business community. And I'm not surprised by that. I think we need to put the case before them. We've had some general interest on some specific projects, but I think that is really the next step, is to engage that broader business community, to put more effort and resources into their ability to actually make an impact by mentoring and by hiring, either part-time or sometimes employees that gives them the ability to pick up experience and training that they can turn into full-time careers. I mean, there's many things that the business community can do that doesn't necessarily require hard dollars, but will inspire those that are challenged in the educational front, or those that are challenged in the housing front, could get benefit from through the efforts of the business community. So I'm looking forward to the conference and really exploring in a more robust way how the business community can actually tap into and get benefit from being a partner in poverty reduction.
Don, any surprises?
Well, it's not sort of sector-wide, but we had some extraordinary input and buy-in from small business owners who understood the case personally, and whether they came at it through faith or through volunteerism or something else, they found the work and began to articulate in their own business context why they saw value in this. And so it's certainly possible. I think we have to figure out how to convert that and spread that. But in one other case where there was more of a sector-wide support was, and this was fantastic, was when we were putting together our Community Development Corporation. The level of support and buy-in that we got from our real estate developer community, who were quite interested in lending sort of technical support to the land evaluation, the governance, people who were prepared to volunteer their professional expertise to be on the board, because they saw it as something where their professional background could actually help make a difference in an area in the market where their business wouldn't necessarily make the returns that would justify justify it, but where they felt an opportunity to make a difference. And so the very strong response from our real estate community to support those community development social enterprise efforts was really heartening, actually. And I think that those kinds of social enterprise joint venture opportunities may be worth further exploring to try to broaden the appeal into other sectors.
That's great. Fred, I have one question that's directed to you, and I think if we could cover it in a minute or less, that would be ideal. The question is, just understanding a bit more, you mentioned Anchor Institution Group. Mm-hmm. And the questioner is just wondering what that is, who's involved, just a very short time we've got left.
Yeah, so it is essentially not led by the City of Hamilton, but it's a collection of the City of Hamilton leadership, city manager specifically, our healthcare, Hamilton Health Sciences head, our McMaster University dean, and Mohawk College dean, and the folks that are working in our major industrial institutions or industrial industries. All of those have come together as part of, and the boards of education, all of those have come together to address the major citywide problems that we have. And whether that's in education or in literacy or in poverty or in housing, we believe that all of those agencies have a role to play in pulling this together. So we've been able to have regular meetings with those groups to put their focus and attention on resolutions that can actually make a difference for the benefit of our entire community. And the theory being, and I'll finish with that, is that everyone owns poverty. It's not the city, it's not the province, it's not the feds, it's not the business. We all have a stake in this. We all have an ownership issue around it, and we all benefit by making some headway and making some and eliminating poverty.
That's a wonderful way to end it. That everybody owns a piece of this, and certainly, I think this interview has really shown people that the leadership that the two of you are demonstrating in your communities and in your relationships with other mayors and other orders of government is a really encouraging for all of us and inspiring. We really have come to the end of the session, so I want to thank both of you for the time you've taken to share your thoughts, your wisdom, your insights, your experiences. I think it's been really insightful for everyone listening. There's just 3 remaining points from my side. One is to stay connected. So stay in touch with the Vibrant Community Cities Reducing Poverty group. You can receive the latest thinking, tools, and resources from around the poverty reduction community by subscribing to Vibrant Community's monthly newsletter, Cities Connect, or visit the learning community online at vibrantcanada.ca. Also a reminder that another way to connect is to join us in person in Hamilton on April 4th to the 6th to continue this really important conversation. Mayor Eisenberger and the City of Hamilton will be hosting. We're looking forward to having over 250 mayors, city councillors, community members, and business leaders as we look at expanding the multi-sectoral poverty reduction roundtable. So over those 3 days, you'll have a chance to tour innovative sites for poverty reduction in Hamilton, learn from successes in other parts of Canada, and walk away with new tools and skills and hopefully new inspiration and energy to tackle this problem. There is on the screen right now is the registration information and the website to register for the event. And finally, I'd just like to thank everyone who's been involved in this, the 2 mayors and anyone who's been participating. You can email Natasha at tamarackcommunity.ca to provide feedback on today's webinar. Tamarack is always looking for ways to improve the webinars that they do. And you'll also receive a follow-up email with a link to the audio recording for today's call. So once again, thanks Mayor Eisenberger, thanks Mayor Iveson. We'll see you guys somewhere around in the next few weeks. And thanks to everyone else who's been listening in on this conversation.
Thanks, Brock.
Okay, thank you.
Look forward to seeing you in April in Hamilton.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.